everybody, and I'm delighted to be welcoming all of you to the Women of the World Festival 2022. It is a pleasure to be here, albeit online, but it's okay. You still get the great conversations that you can always expect from us. This panel is called Rani ki Arsi, and I am delighted to have these three incredibly talented, accomplished, brilliant women in conversation with me for the next hour. And without further ado, let's get the introductions out of the way so everybody can sort of look idhar udhar while I list their many achievements. And then we can dive right in. My name is Mina Malik, and I will be your host for this afternoon. I am a writer and poet based in Lahore, and I often find myself having interesting and fantastic conversations with people, which is a great upshot of being in this line of work. We are joined today by, again, three excellent women. The first of whom I will introduce is B. Gul, who, of course, I'm sure needs no introduction, but just in case you live under a rock and you don't know who she is, B is an award-winning screenwriter and director who is well known for plays like Raqib Se and Dar Si Jati Hai Sila, for which she won a Lux Style Award in 2019. Her stories often deal with themes of reality and identity. Her plays are centered around women and their power as they navigate the world, and her plays highlight social issues that concern South Asian women. We are also joined by Sadia Khatri, who is a writer based in Karachi. They write across genres, and their work is often about gender, grief, and cities, both real and imagined. Sadia is also one of the founders of the feminist collective Girls at Tapas. And last but not least, Nazuk Iftikhar Rao, who is a Lahore-based development economist working on a novel. She was a fiction fellow at the South Asia Speaks Literary Mentorship in 2021, and her photo essays have been published by the Aleph Review and the Missing Slate. Nazuk's writing explores the intersection between cities, moods, photography, and poetry. So welcome, ladies, to the panel and to Rani ki Arsi. It's such a pleasure. So I think that it's really interesting that the title of the panel is Rani ki Arsi. Now, Rani is basically our overarching theme for the festival this year, and it's sort of exploring the various ways women come into power, navigate it, kind of how women go through the world in these various creative ways. And the Arsi, of course, as you all know, is a mirror, but more specifically is often a little mirrored ring that one wears. Yeah. And all the sort of wonderful metaphor that the mirror has, but also that the specific, the personal Arsi or the personal mirror is very small, right? And you can really only see yourself in fragments in it. And it's just something that I find really fascinating to think about in terms of women writing. And all three of you are women who write and use their writing and their words and their texts, basically, whether it's photography or it's a poem or it's a screenplay. These are all ways that we are kind of turning that gaze onto the world and trying to find spaces of joy is how I would try to describe it. And that's something that I want to maybe, jump into later on. But B, if we could start with you, and I think that your writing is probably dynamic in a very different way, because, Nazuk and Sadi and I are writing, and we're writing that gets published on page and people read it. And our interaction with our readers isn't as immediate as yours might be, because you're writing these screenplays and you're writing these texts which go out into the world and have this immediate response. And we are so invested in our dramas. Our audiences are really, really into it. And there's so much conversation around it. Like, afterwards, everybody watches the YouTube and it's flooded with comments and people are discussing episodes. And they're just like really into it. So how does that impact how you kind of approach your writing?
Of course it does. Thank you so much for having me here, Amina, and thank you for the introduction. When I started writing, I think that was the same impact that I used to have on myself. And I was growing up and watching television, as you've said, it's most of our, it's a very cultural thing in Pakistan to watch art ka drama. So sit down and then talk about it and discuss it over the phone, or whenever you get to meet, or the family, women would just sit together and watch ke kal ki episode dekhi thi, what happened. So I think the impact was already there on me as a viewer at that point. And when I started writing, I think I was just writing to find out what I am thinking and what I am looking at, not at what people are going to watch. So I was quite naive when I started writing the screenplay. And I was actually, it was a conversation with my own self rather than, the audience out there. So the shocker came quite later, after a couple of years, when I started to find out the impact also. And then almost 60% of our population has television sets, even if they don't have water, right? They do have television. So look at the impact, look at the reach. And a screenplay writer can, reach up to 60% of the population. It's huge. It's huge for me. And then I felt that burden, that responsibility, which comes with your screenplay writing. You just can't get away with writing anything because you're actually addressing and reaching down to the mindsets. And I also believe that, I don't know if it's a very biased thing to say or whatever, but I also believe that something which goes on screen, that form of art, it passes our conscience in a way that no other art can do, right? It's very immediate, as you just said. So I was quite thrilled, excited, and of course felt a lot of responsibility as a screenwriter to write something for people who are watching it, and that whatever I'm writing, it just goes directly to your feelings, while you're watching it. Again, at a very instant effect, and deep down, and maybe into the darkest rooms of your soul somewhere, whatever, where you don't want to go otherwise. So it goes and it can actually stimulate that part of you. So I think when my writing got, I would say maybe mature or more realistic, or it was more aware after that. I wasn't aware of that. So it took me a couple of years to be aware of what I am writing and where is it going actually. So that connection was, of course, it keeps you very perpetually unmotivated when you want to write what you really want to write, because you have to. But that's a huge challenge. That's a challenge, I feel.
Yes. But I'm interested because you said that, when you first started writing, you weren't kind of burdened by this sense of responsibility about it. Because, not to say that you were like out there writing all these things and not thinking about them. Of course you were. But, this idea that art has a responsibility also. And then in a way, I feel like that's where the space for a feminist praxis kind of comes into the writing, where it's not just art or it's not just creative expression, but there's a politics to it. And I think that a lot of times people associate, when you say, everything is political, people are just like, they sort of tend to think of it in a very kind of, in a very narrow way, that somehow you're weaponizing your art or you're trying to sort of stuff an idea down somebody's throat. But I think, Sadia, this is something that you have a great deal of experience with, is that all our acts of creative ownership and all our acts of trying to navigate the world, everything is political. Like, nothing is not political. And in terms of women and trying to reclaim our spaces and trying to reclaim our imaginary gaze and our imaginary space as well, like, there has to be a kind of a mindful approach to that. You can't just sort of, it doesn't just happen.
Thank you for having me here. It's so happy to go over these ideas, which honestly drive me very crazy, क्योंकि ये चीजें हर वक्त चल रही होती हैं, और I think writing में shifts बहुत आते हैं. So I'll just to continue off from your point about the talking about responsibility and politics. One thing that I've been thinking a lot about is, am I writing from a site of reaction or from a site of reimagination? Because I think those are very different things, and I think आप दोनों करते हो. But I do notice this particular trend where a lot of feminists and a lot of women end up writing from a side of reacting to their trauma or defensiveness, right? Basically आप यूं होते हो, फिर आप explain कर रहे होते हो अपने experience को, या आप उसको अलग तरह से उसको अलग, you're trying to give it a different slant of light. And lately what I've been interested in is what if we, instead of reacting, what would it look like if you write from a side of building, of like reimagining? So one of the I write speculative fiction also. और मैंने अभी एक कहानी जो इस साल आएगी, It's been in the works for 2 years. It's called City of Mitra. And the questions I was asking is, what would a world look like that was truly, truly feminist? What does that mean? But that means not to imagine it from the baseline of what we have or don't have, but what if you completely do away with this reality and then imagine a city? But usme bahut masle aa jate hain, because it's easier said than done, right? And once I wrote that story, and I mean, ab wo ho gayi, you have to let things go. I think there's a lot of problems with it still, and I think I failed in a lot of ways. And now I'm thinking you can't fully do that. So मैं वो shift की बात कर रही हूँ कि आप एक तरह नहीं रह सकते. Now I'm thinking like you have to get to the root of why things are the way they are. So the fiction I'm working on right now isn't interested in utopia. Now there's a shift in like, okay, but why do women behave the way they do right now? Why are we maybe obsessed with victimhood or trauma or wo kahan? So I mean, I think we need both or a multitude of sort of positions. But what I also think about is कि एक dominant narrative क्या है. तो अगर एक बिखरी हुई औरत या एक औरत जो हर वक्त victimhood के जरिए अपनी identity को पहचान रही है, अगर वो narrative dominant है, then do I want to add to that? Or if I do want to add to that, how am I writing about that, right? Am I really getting into her psyche, or am I just making her into a kind of stereotype?
But Sadia, do you think that a lot of times this sort of the victimhood narrative is a product of a male gaze or a male appropriation of the female experience? That's the kind of woman that men like to see or talk about, and that's the kind of woman that then, because if it's the male idea of, an, I wouldn't say ideal, but a woman that they think is a common woman. And because we're then working inside these patriarchal capitalist structures, then that's the narrative that gets pushed forward the most.
Yeah, that is the narrative that gets pushed forward the most, maybe. But I do contend, I'm not sure if I agree that male gaze sirf mardon se aati hai. So I think that is something we need to break down, right? When we say male gaze, who are we making it like an essentialist argument कि सिर्फ मर्दों से वो आती है कि औरतों, any gender can write an unfeminist text. Any gender can hold an unfeminist, non-feminist point of view. So I'm really interested in the how, and I think that's the business of fiction actually, is वो उस story की arc क्या है, उसकी गहराई क्या है, not कि what it is. You could write the same plot line, एक बिखरी हुई औरत, but you could really get inside her head, I think, or you could treat her as like just a plot line. So I think that's the kind of distinction I'm more lately interested in making. Is कि are you really looking at the why and the how somebody becomes who they become? So बिल्कुल male gaze के बारे में भी लिखना चाहिए, because that's the reality. That's part of, I think it's impossible to say that it won't be present. So even in this story that I wrote, where I'm trying to imagine this world that's essentially free of the male gaze, is it though really? Because I'm not, So I think it's also a matter of how much work we do in our life. And I think that's what's also meant by the personal being political. Because eventually आप अपने experiences और जो भी आपकी knowledge की हद है, वो आप ले जा रहे हो page पे. So in order to imagine a different world, you have to have undone those ideas in your own life. So a lot of the practice, I think, for writers is also just kind of thinking about how am I undoing or unlearning the gaze in my own body, in my own, in my selfhood, and then that will affect the limits of the imagination on the page.
It's like how you're turning the mirror upon yourself, and where is, sort of like where the reflection is bouncing off of. And I'm really glad, Sadia, that you talked about the reimagining of space, and Nazuk, this is where sort of I'm going to draw you into this conversation, is that a lot of your photo essays are this really wonderful, I think, a combination of photography and text, and you're creating this really unique kind of almost dreamscape, which is really individual. And do you feel that, again, is that sort of part of this reimagining that Sadia also talked about, is that when we are women writing as women and writing about women and writing about the things that are important to us, do you think that the future, in a way, and again, of course, like, can you really ever be free of, the outside gaze or being othered of course, that's a very complex thing. But how far do you feel like, for women to really kind of take up space in a creative way, do you think that requires a completely new approach to the imagination almost? I realize this is a massive question. I'm sure you can do it. Like, what do you feel like that's going to look like? Or what does it look like for you?
First of all, thank you for having me here, Mina, Beagle, Sadia. This is like an honor, like 3 incredible women. Okay, so how do I see that? When I started off with my photography, my writing, which was personally just for me, it was a space where I could escape the idea of log kya kahenge. I could just kind of step away from that. I could sort of be more free. Even when I step out, I have to contain myself. I have to contain my body, my voice. I have to contain how I look so that I don't provoke someone. And that for me it's stifling. It gets to it holds me back. And that's something I was trying to sort of go for when I started the photography thing. And it was basically just looking at people, letting them be, letting them talk about what they feel, whatever was authentic to them, and letting them be vulnerable in that moment. So essentially for me, how I reimagine it's a gaze that allows men, women, anyone to be vulnerable in that space, to be their authentic self, whoever they want to be. And the power dynamic, usko todna hai. वो जो abuse or toxic view, which could be like internal misogyny as well. And you guys have talked about this previously. Yes. And I feel that is something that in my head, it's a very difficult place to be. I don't imagine कि Sultana's dream की तरह बन जाएगा. लेकिन that's the imagining I have of it.
It's always interesting to me how when we imagine this sort of amazing feminist woman world, it almost necessarily becomes utopia, which in itself is impossible. And I think that, this is something that you were touching on, is that we kind of have to sort of work with what we've got to kind of dismantle it and remantle it in a way. Is remantling a word? But I'm thinking about how, and Nazak, I really love what you said about how this sort of your particular female gaze is one that's wanting to give space to men and women to be vulnerable and to be authentic and to tell a story that is true. And I think that a lot of times people tend to not realize that this whole sort of the idea of feminist praxis is to give that space to everybody. It's not just for women, right? And then there's also this this idea of Zinani writing, and women's writing being in its own category. So for me, I think in my own writing practice and in practices that I'm observing, sort of these, contemporary voices such as all of yours, is this idea of reclaiming the Zinana and reclaiming the Zinani Kahani from a place of power and a place of ownership and a place of giving it importance. Because why is mainstream creative narrative always has this masculine idea about, like important stories are war and politics and khun kharaba and jange hui and, kings, and then women's stories, which are closer to the heart and closer to our lived experience, are always seen as, sort of cute and on the side. And I think maybe, Beagle, you could sort of tell us a little bit more about this, because the kind of plays that you write, it's really the heart of all of our lives. If it's like Darsi Jati Hai Sila, the predators in the house, these are things that impact our lives so much more and deeply. And of course, war is bad and it affects people's lives if you're in it, of course. But when it really comes down to the bare bones of our basic existence, a play, it comes closest to the heart of it. Or if we're talking about, Raqib said, we're talking about women who have nowhere to go or have lost husbands or have these kids they need to look after or have these dreams and aspirations for themselves. So how do you reconcile telling the stories that you want to tell, but also having to navigate, really sort of I'm sure, tiresome, but also necessary things like ratings, like audiences, like producers saying, ye chalega. You know, I'm sure that there must be a great deal of kind of negotiation there, because there are a lot of things that get in the way between writers and their audiences in your line of work as well.
That's true. And I think this is the biggest challenge, because, I'm not writing a book conveniently that I can write in isolation and that's my book. Whoever wants to read it can buy it and read it, or reject it or accept it. It's a very collaborative thing that we do. Like, I have a producer who's investing, then I have a channel who is going to give me the screen where I'm going to put my work. I have a director, and the director and I should be on the same page, have the same vision at least, to work on a story. So then I have actors and editors and so many people around. Look, hundreds of people actually working to make one drama come to life. It is very, very challenging also, but it's been almost a decade I'm here now, Mina. So I have my fort. Shuru mein to it was,
well done.
Shuru mein to there was a constant victimization, actually, a constant victimization. A, I was a woman. B, I was telling stories that made them very uncomfortable. And I thought that was my job as a screenplay writer, to give the uncomfortable material or watch to them.
Absolutely.
Not the comfortable stories. And 3, I was not bringing them ratings because I was not showing that the narrative that they thought would bring rating and commercialism and capitalism to them. So that was a problem, of course. And उसमें 2-3 challenges और भी थे as far as my audience are concerned, because I was told कि जो चीजें आप कह रही हैं इनसे आप relate कर सकती हैं, not the masses. I did not agree with it initially. I do agree with it partially now. Because I've been here from past 10 years, and I've actually very closely worked with all this. How does it happen? Who's watching it? What? Right? So अब वहाँ पर ये problem आ जाता है कि I just thought suddenly that, people I would meet were women like me, or you yourself, and they would come up to me, हमने आपका वो play देखा, oh my God, it was really nice, और बहुत अच्छा लगा. And I would just look at that woman who was telling me all this, and I said, thank you, मगर you seem quite okay in your life, right? Apparently very empowered, at least you're working, you're independent, right? You seem to be very independent, at least. I don't know, emotionally or not, at least financially and physically you do. Then I thought, what am I doing? I'm just converting the already converted. Then I'm not doing my job enough. So that's a huge challenge for me as a screenwriter, because I have to reach out to the masses. That was a time when I wrote Dar Si Jati Hai Sila, because it was, again, a middle class joint family system structure that I was talking about, that the sexual abuse is happening there, right in your homes. It was challenging because it was uncomfortable. I was sent Pembra notices to this. They kept on threatening us, they're going to shut down the show.
They love doing that, don't they?
They do. I like them too. It makes me feel good when they send me a
they're watching. I like it that they're participating. Yeah, they're watching.
They're watching in it. They think, isko rok do, iska matlab this should go. So वो एक problem था, because एक emotionally भी बहुत illiterate है ना हम, myself, I, all of us are, we are getting there, but अभी भी हमें वो पता नहीं है. So बहुत challenging होता है screen के लिए इसीलिए लिखना कि I have to reach out to people, to women who really need help or support or some guidance or some light or some alternative in life. So, we need to change that narrative and do it smartly. So they do give me that space. Otherwise, if I don't bring ratings to them, of course, then they're going to cancel me out immediately. That's what they've been trying to do. So I have to keep that balance. I have to say what I really want to say. Yet, I need to tell them, yes, your business is all right. I'm not, you're not going to go bankrupt.
This is true. Yes, this is true. And I think that now in this day and age where we don't have, noble landlords patronizing us, giving us stipends and giving us just money to live and work, aram se, we need to be smart about it. We do. I think all of us, and I think particularly as women, we're constantly navigating and balancing so many things. Like Nazuk, you talked about this as well, of sort of even venturing out just into public spaces. And all of us are engaging in public spaces in these really distinct ways. And Sadia and Nazuk, both of you work and look at cities and how cities impact our imaginations. And I think that this is something we don't talk about nearly as much as we should, is that, and Sadia, also with your work with Girls at Dhabas, this idea that our geography and our surroundings have a huge, I think, role in the way that we not only see the world, but experience the world, and then are able to write about the world and communicate the world, and a lot of times, again, that whole idea of the zanana being so closed and so internal and almost like, like Angan style, where everything is just around the inner courtyard. But now, as contemporary, as modern women who are pushing at the boundaries of the zanana, where do both of you, I think, both of you can jump in. How do you feel that is impacting the way that what role do you feel like our interactions with our public spaces influence our gaze and how we kind of engage with our imaginations? So maybe Sadia, maybe you could go first and then Nazuk. It's like teacher's head, you.
No, that's a really great question, Mina. And I think wo aleda cheezein nahi hai. The public makes the private, the private makes the public. So जब आप एक चीज को छेड़ेंगे, हिलाएंगे थोड़ा, तो दूसरी चीज भी हिलेगी. And if I think about my own experience, just with organizing and feminist work or Girls at Dhabas वगैरह, तो जैसे मेरी relationship शहर के साथ बेहतर हुई, वैसे ही मेरी रिलेशनशिप घर के साथ बेहतर हुई, क्योंकि वहां से आपको टूल्स मिलते हैं, कॉन्फिडेंस मिलती है, जो फिर आप अपने अंदर के दायरों में आप लेके जाते हैं. And the other way, so I think maybe this idea of like reverting the gaze is saying that these things are not unlinked actually. कि अगर आप जंग के बारे में भी लिख रहे हैं, तो आपको ये भी बोलना होगा घर में क्या हो रहा है. So I'm thinking of it that way as we're talking actually, कि शायद ये तरीका है to not say one is of more importance even, but to say that they all affect each other. And absolutely, when you push at your imagination in the public space, that affects your imagination in other spaces, but also on the space of the page.
Yeah, that's true. I actually agree with you, Sadia, and just adding just a little bit more, for me, I think it was since I was so conscious of my own physical body, my own voice being heard, that when I went on paper, that's when I kind of I was able to tell a lot of things which I would not say with my voice or with in any art form initially. Through photography, I was not able to do that. And when I was able to, so I was a different person in writing. I was a lot more braver. I felt like I could be myself. I could expand. I could feel joy and not be looked at with a toxic, horrible gaze that could just make me feel like I can die any day if I've provoked anyone. So for me, I think आपने बहुत अच्छी बात की है कि हाँ, they're linked. And so my relationship to my art, my writing, my photography sort of allowed me to go back into public space and sort of expand a little, open up a little, take in a little. And also, since I was already the invisible, isme, quieter one, so I would watch. And it allowed me to watch a little bit more carefully and listen more. So that's something that I felt like the city and I had. And it's continuously evolving, of course. But that's how I see it.
That's really beautiful. I being able to watch and being able to listen. And that I think only comes from a place where one essentially feels safe, at least in that moment or in that particular space. You feel safe and you can linger and you can just loiter and just be around and see how the world is kind of unfolding. And I think that, Sadia, that's a really good point, is that both of the things then, the outside and the inside then mesh, because you feel safer, you feel braver, you go back home richer, your inner life is richer. And this is where I'm curious, and again, this is for all three of you, is that how do we create what I initially called spaces of joy for ourselves? And as women, creative women who are writing and telling these stories, we can't separate the suffering from it. Right. We can't separate, the fact that so many women, like you said, Beagle, so many women are suffering. So many women are victims of a lot of things which are outside of their control. And those are stories that we need to keep telling and retelling. But then how do we reclaim joy for ourselves? How do we take our lived experience and try and give it some buoyancy also? Because it's tiring now, isn't it? Just exhausting to have to kind of repeatedly veto this whole of, that things are not okay. But can we sort of balance that with joy and with happiness and just pure pleasure in being? And how can we weave it in to our work?
Yes, you're right, actually. Whereas, I don't know, we do get lost. I myself, while I'm writing all this, it's so taxing, it's emotionally draining. When I was writing Arsi Jati, so I would go into deep depressions also, because I started getting mails from all over the country, even outside the country, and then I just realized, oh my God, maybe 100% of us are abused sexually also, right? Not even 90%, I would say 100%, because I got to know so many true stories. And I felt terrible, as much helpless as I could. So that itself was very much draining and or whatnot. But you're right that we need to balance it out. Maybe we're not ready yet completely for that. Also because there's a lot of pain out there. There's a lot of pain out there that I realized. I would also like to add something. अभी इससे पहले कुछ space की भी बात हो रही थी और सब कुछ, just to add on to that a little. कि जो अगर मैं अपना सिर्फ काम देखूं और because आप लोग सब audience हैं, देखते हैं, viewers हैं, systematically and politically television को हमारे देखा जाता है और उसको regulate किया जाता है. So it comes from a very political power also. So back in 70s, तो एक clear shift आया था narrative के अंदर, and उसके बाद से लेके अब तक you would see a lot of women confined in their homes. So basically the idea was the chadar and char diwari, that you're supposed to be here, live here, this is your life, this is your politics, this is your joy or sadness or life or death or whatever. ये चार दीवारों के अंदर आप रहिए, बाहर की दुनिया से आपका ताल्लुक नहीं है, वो आपका काम नहीं है, So एक वहां से ये 70s से एक चीज शुरू की गई जो हमें नजर आती है systematically, उसको फिर weave in किया गया आपके सारे narratives में, especially screen, I'm talking about screen and theater or whatever the visual art is there. So आप अगर अक्सर देखोगे तो आपकी जो protagonist television की होती है, film की, they do nothing. They have nothing else to do in their life. There's no goal. There's no profession. There's nothing else but a boy in their life at times too. So और वो भी a rich boy जो आके उनकी जिंदगी से हर चीज, हर मसला macho जो आएगा और जो सब यूं करके ठीक कर देगा, that Prince Charming, किसी unicorn पे. But that's there. So they have nothing in their lives at all, nothing to think about, because they've been told कि आपने तो शादी करनी है और आपने खुशी खुशी, या आपने एक अच्छा सा लड़का, I'm sorry to say, उसको किसी तरह से फंसा लें, रैपिन करें अपनी उंगली के इर्द गिर्द और आप हंसी खुशी जिंदगी गुजारें और आप उसका ATM कार्ड बनाएं और जो मर्जी करें, right? So that's how it is. हाँ, मजे करें.
And it's also reducing men to this cardboard ATM also, ना कि ये आपका भी काम बस यही है कि आप बस और आपकी खूबसूरत वैक्यूअस बीवी और बस
तो आप politically आपकी political thinking compromise हो गई, आपको ये आपने बिल्कुल सोच लिया कि you are just a doll और आप घर में बैठी आएंगी सज समर के, या जूते खाएंगी on the other extreme, या जूते खाएंगी और फिर भी आप कहेंगी कि I'm a good woman because मैं जूते खाती हूँ और सब्र करती हूँ.
And there's also this moral attached to sabr karna, and in spite of everything, there's a kind of,
it's a good woman syndrome. It's very much, and again as बिल्कुल and जैसे नाजुक ने कहा that internalized misogyny is very much there working. That's what patriarchy has done in all these years, कि उसने हमें अपना अब तो हम उसको represent करते हैं,
बना लिया.
अम्मा आपकी या आपके घर की औरतें, या at least at times like your friends and your colleagues, or वो आपको बहुत जगह check कर रहे होते हैं कि what are you wearing, how are you thinking. ऐसे नहीं सोचते, तो हमने बहुत सुना है ना बचपन से. तो हाउ कैन यू टेल समवन कि ऐसे नहीं सोचो और ऐसे सोचो. तो आपने तो वहीं पे उसकी ग्रोथ को कॉम्प्रोमाइज किया है, उसकी मेंटल ग्रोथ को भी, उसकी इमोशनल ग्रोथ को भी. सो एक ये मुझे बहुत सिस्टमैटिक डिक्लाइन नजर आया, जो कि बहुत सोचा समझा था कि औरत को कन्फाइन कर दें दोज 4 walls, कि दिस इज योर लाइफ, सो थिंक अबाउट दैट, हाउ टू प्लीज अ मैन, how to bring children to his life. उसको बच्चों को भी अगर लड़की हो गई है तो उसको कितना नेक आप पाल सकती हैं. That's it. That's all about you. So rather than being, so it's it's not even human. I myself, I don't even call myself a woman writer. I would like to be called a progressive writer in that way.
Yes, exactly.
Right? So it doesn't really matter who I am. Absolutely. Absolutely. तो ये चीजें भी हैं जिनसे तो वो इतनी गड़बड़ है, इतनी सफोकेशन है कि उस, और जो जॉय की बात आप कर रही हैं वो भी दे वांट टू फाइंड इट समवेयर देयर इन दोस 4 walls. उससे बाहर की कहीं जॉय ना हो. यानी आपकी प्रोफेशन आपकी जॉय नहीं हो सकती, आपकी कोई एम्बिशन आपकी जॉय नहीं हो सकती. there's nothing wrong with being ambitious, there's nothing wrong with being ambitious. तो मगर हमें तो कहा जाता है ना कि आप सेक्रीफाइस करना सीखें. Put your career behind you, put your education behind you.
Be grateful, because that's what, and good women minimize themselves, and good women stay put, and good women don't think about jumping over the wall and running off.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Like ये नहीं होता, आप साइकिल नहीं चला के और आप उधर जा सकती हैं. Sadia, do you feel like, especially with your work with girls at dhabas, I know that initially there was a sort of, it was tough because like women don't belong in dhabas, for example, or women don't sort of go about cycling down the streets of Karachi in their in their trousers, and yet we do. And like these opening up these spaces to kind of dismantle this idiotic sense of and regressive and oppressive sense of what a good woman is.
Opening up that space of joy, I really love everything that Bigol is saying, क्योंकि आपको ये भी देखना होता है जो reality क्या है. And it's not कि आप overnight joy, you can't reach joy overnight. You can't be like, okay, from today I am just going to run after joy, which itself is such a pressure, I think, on women, on feminists, somehow just upturn, like you can't. There's a lot of suffering, there's a lot of pain, and you have to feel unsafe on the streets before you ever feel safe. आपको उसकी जड़ पे जाना होता है. So I think a lot of the work with girls at dhabas was also about let's get to the root of this, right? How much of the suffering, how much of the fear is the city? How much of it is yourself? And the part of it that is yourself, that you can work on. Na? So agar aap ek privileged middle class, upper middle class औरत हैं, so really is the city the monster, or is the monster at home? Right? Or the monster really at home? So I think kind of,
or is it inside you?
Or is it inside you, right? Or is it your privilege? Is it the fact that you don't want to step out of your comfort zone? That's why I think it's so linked, right? कि आपका lived experience क्या है और उसमें आप क्या बदल रहे हो, and therefore what you're able to do creatively. तो वो एक individual collective दोनों responsibility साथ साथ लेके चलनी होती हैं. But I do think कि joy तक पहुंचने के लिए you have to pass the darkness. You can't just say oh joy, and I don't even think it's suffering or darkness. It's not one note. It's not कि हर वक्त आप रो रहे होते. And I think there are we have histories of subversion even within suffering, even within darkness, right? आप गाने गाते हो, you use humor as a way to make sense of that pain. So I think it's more about that. If when we are writing about suffering, when we are writing about pain, when we're digging deep into the darkness, is it one note, or are you able to kind of bring in different textures? Are you able to bring in humor? Are you able to bring in some music, right? To that.
And you just can't, exactly, I totally agree with her. आप बैठ के ये भी नहीं कह सकते कि now I'm going to write something that is going to be very joyful. Or you can say, I'm going to write a sad story this morning, because I'm sad. You just can't do it. You will be happy when you will be happy, when the happiness will be there soon, I hope.
Yeah. But but my curiosity is about a kind of, I think, almost deliberate calling in, that when we're writing about whatever we are writing, then to kind of just be mindful about or think about it. And of course, this is not to presume that you guys don't, of course you do. But I think what I'm curious about is how we are so much, audiences are more just more comfortable and want to consume stories where there is just more suffering than joy. And somehow joy doesn't seem to be a woman's lot in life. Like our understanding of even if if I'm thinking of South Asian literature and I'm thinking of English and Urdu literature, like we have to suffer. Everybody's suffering. All our love songs are about longing. Nobody, wasal to hota hi nahi hai. Like nobody gets their beloved. Kya matlab? Like I want more getting now. I don't, where's the wasal ki raat? Can we just like have things now?
I think you're right about sorry.
Please go ahead. Go ahead, yes, Sadia, please.
No, I think वो जो narrative वाली बात है कि what is the grain, what is the dominant narrative? कि ज़्यादातर stories ऐसी क्यों हैं? हमें ये भी पूछना चाहिए. And where are the bad women who don't get moralized by everyone, or who aren't end up being ostracized by everyone? So वो वाली कहानियाँ कहाँ हैं? And I do think that is also where we step in. But I fundamentally believe that I think इसमें थोड़ा फर्क भी है. I think Beagle, the work you do, it's again it's so caught up with people, with audience. I think maybe Nazuk and I have a bit more freedom that way on the page. Because I particularly don't like thinking from a side of responsibility, क्योंकि फिर मैं reader के बारे में बहुत सोच रही होती हूँ और वो मेरे लिए एक रुकावट बन जाती है मेरे काम में. But if I'm curious about that, if I come to the character from a place of curiosity, right, like I just want to understand this bad woman and what are the stakes, वो कहाँ तक पहुँच सकती है, उसकी limits क्या है, उसकी हद क्या है. So that's kind of the work I'm trying to do. But I think it's hard because वही आप अपनी जिंदगी में जब तक reimagine नहीं कर सकते तो आपके पेज पे limits नहीं बदलते.
And as you also said about, this idea of this voice in one's head saying कि लोग क्या कहेंगे, like whose voice is that? Like where does it come from? And is it the voices of our mothers? Is it the voices of our grandmothers? Is it the voices of our friends? Like Beagle said, all these socializing that we have to kind of really actively try and undo to be able to make art from a place of freedom, where you're not thinking about how somebody's going to receive it, but you're thinking about how best can I do justice to this little arg inside me? How can I sort of fan it better and make it brighter?
Yeah. These voices, we're conditioned to believe that, and forgive me for bringing this up, लेकिन I have always noticed कि जब men will talk about their work, जैसा अच्छा बुरा जो भी बड़ा कॉन्फिडेंस के साथ बोलेंगे. और एक औरत जब वही बात कहने लगी कि वो उसमें थोड़ा
apologetic होगी
and उसी चीज को आहिस्ता से अपने आप को सबड्यू सा करके. And so हमने भी अपने आप को ना एक वे से sort of खुद भी ट्रेन कर लिया. मैं जब कोई बात स्टार्ट करने लगती हूँ, जब कोई बात कहने लगती हूँ, even though there might be a point where I know कि I might be right about this, I know about this, I will hesitate, I will hold myself back. And it's these voices जो मैंने खुद अपनी create कर ली हैं, to sort of like hold myself back, rather than it's reinforced by the society. But I feel like it's those kind of voices which come from like itni zyada hum condition ho gaye, it's within us. They hold us back. They tell us, nahi, this is not worth it. ये तुम इस तरह की बात सोचोगी, तुम इस तरह की बात करोगी, तुम्हारे माँ बाप के बारे में क्या सोचेंगे लोग? That kind of thing. I feel like that's where it comes from.
एक छोटा सा इंटरेस्टिंग ट्विस्ट भी है, मुझे बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग एक लगती है इसके अंदर, एक कंट्रोवर्सी कहें या एक फ्रिक्शन कहें, आई डोंट नो हाउ टू पुट इट, लेकिन जब औरत पैसा लेकर आती है, things do change. ठीक है, हाँ, इकोनॉमिक्स पे जब बात आती है तो भी वो चाहते हैं कि जूता खाकर लाए पैसा, मार खाकर लाए, ये ना कहे कि मैं लाई हूँ, but they want their share. They want to bring money. And then they would like to treat you as a trophy because you're earning, right? So you're making money for them. लेकिन वो आपको नहीं ये बात पे, इस बात पर नहीं आते. जैसे बहुत ही इंटरेस्टिंग बात मैं आपको बताती हूँ, एक पर्सनल के one of my distant cousins just met me after years and said, oh wow, you wrote that and play, और मैंने तुम्हारा थिएटर भी देखा था, बहुत अच्छा था, और ये था और वो था. और फिर बात करते करते उसने उसी जुमले के आखिर में कहा, यार मगर तुम आलू गोश्त बड़ा अच्छा पकाती हो. It was so interesting, it was hilarious, but I said, oh wow.
Yeah, like you can do all the things.
Yeah, but मगर वो जो तुम्हारा काम है वो तो तुम करती हो ना, वो तुम करती रहना, so वो तुम्हारी जगह है. So that you are Rani of that house, right? You keep cooking aloo gosht, and so that's what you should be doing. Not only just तो ये एक बात है, ये बड़ी इंटरेस्टिंग है. तो मुझे इकोनॉमिक्स की भी वो समझ में नहीं आता कि okay, if you're bringing money, you can go out and bring money, but don't say that I am bringing it or I am feeding them out.
Like you're not allowed to take ownership of this power, and you should be proud of it. And I think we know so many women, and this goes across class and goes across economical backgrounds as well, is that women just don't have this space to own it and take ownership and be like, yeah, actually मैं ये घर चलाती हूँ, and इज्जत होनी चाहिए उस चीज की.
इज्जत, I'm sorry, quickly मैं बता दूं कि I was working at an office, तो वहां मेरे साथ जितनी फीमेल थी, काम करी थी मेरी कॉलीग्स, तो मैं उनसे रोज एक सवाल करती थी कि नाश्ता किया, तो वो मुझे एक लंबी स्टोरी सुनाती थी. जो शादीशुदा थी, वो सुबह सास को बना के देना होता है, बच्चों का लंच बनाना होता है, हस्बैंड का बनाना होता है, तो मैं यहाँ आकर नाश्ता मंगाती हूँ. तकरीबन 90% उनमें से ये कहती थी कि हम यहाँ नाश्ता कर लेंगे क्योंकि हम सुबह उठ के ये कर रहे थे, फलां के लिए ये चीज कर रहे थे, उसके कपड़े इस्त्री कर रहे थे. And I used to think you are coming here for good 8 to 12 hours, and आप भी अपना वक्त लगा रही हैं और सारे काम करके आ रही, लेकिन आपके जो प्राइमरी रोल्स हैं वो जो आपने एक बना दिए हैं, उस स्ट्रक्चर से you can't step out.
No, you can't. And this seems to be the case for, I think, if I can just think of a lot of, even in the West, a lot of like famous female writers, I think this is the problem for everybody, is that your work was always had to be snatched between the interstices of childcare and house and husband and stuff husbands are up to, and snatch. Like I remember Daphne du Maurier used to write in her father-in-law's clinic. He was a doctor, so when clinic was over, then she'd go and sit at his desk and then write in the middle of the night, because that's when the desk was farig. Or Sylvia Plath writing at 3 in the morning. When she was writing the Ariel poems, she used to wake up at 3 in the morning and write at the kitchen table and then give the bachas nashta. And it just seems so frustrating that even now our work is seen as the hobby, whether you're making money from it or not. Even if you are making money from it, and it has value, but it's just why do we have to fight so hard to get that space that we deserve for it? कि आलू गोश्त भी बनाएं और फिर कमाएं भी और काम भी करें. It just seems frustrating that it's still so uphill for all of us. And it's great.
Most of the women who are getting married at times, they have to resign. And I've met so many wonderful, amazing young women, so energetic, doing so great in their lives, saying कि हमारी तो परसों सरसों शादी तय हो गई है, तो हम तो अब आखिरी महीना ये notice period दे रहे हैं because we have to resign. I said, why would you do that? Is your husband going to resign also? So they said, no. So I said, why are you?
Where he has on economic agency should be a gateway towards actually having more control over what decisions you're making. So बिल्कुल उल्टा हो रहा है, and it's क्योंकि हम वही ना हम someone else is defining whether that independence is you know I don't know, a gateway for confidence or for you to have more agency or not. But
the first sacrifice is good bahu na, जिसने नौकरी छोड़ दी.
I think so. Yeah. But I think at some point, I don't know, you know, आपको खुद भी कुछ लोगों की I understand circumstances के मसले होते हैं, but I think a lot of us just have to एक switch आपका, मेरे लिए ऐसे हुआ था. I think there was a switch that at one point just went off के like, you know, ये तो the more I'm a good, it doesn't mean I'm going to be rewarded actually. This is a total scam. At some point I had to decide I'm not playing this game क्योंकि इसमें मेरा फायदा है ही नहीं. And I'll share an anecdote because I write a lot about the city, and I write a lot about like wearing all kinds of clothes in the city, and back then I was a smoker also, तो मैं सड़कों पे बहुत, you know, so I had an essay which was essentially about my experience, a memoir on smoking in the street, and I published that under a different name क्योंकि वही लोग क्या कहेंगे वाली बात आई थी. तो you know it just wasn't an option उस वक्त. मुझे लगता था ये तो कभी हो ही नहीं सकता कि oh my god, how will I ever with my name write about sex or write about especially memoir के genre में ना, कि तो अपनी जिंदगी के बारे में आप बात करें. But once that switch went off, so you know, it flipped. And I think it's also linked for me to economic independence too. Like I'm not reliant on my parents anymore. तो आप कहें आपको जो कहना है, लेकिन उसको वक्त लगा, उसको काफी वक्त लगा. But I think वही मुझे खुद अपने you know, you have to kind of brace yourself and say, okay, here are the two roads. Which one am I going to take? So I think those of us who have a lot of privilege and can get away with it, and especially those of us writing in English, I don't think same risks. I don't think same, you know, you're not up against the same battles actually. So we need to also be very honest about कहाँ पे choice है और कहाँ पे नहीं है.
And like you said previously, Sadia, and to what extent are our choices being dictated by our own internalized notions of what should be or shouldn't be? Like we're assigning this moral value and we're assigning this kind of ethical almost value to things arbitrarily almost, without really examining where is that voice coming from. Like who said that? Like किसने कहा था ये? And oftentimes when I think about it for myself, I'm just like, I said, I've never really personally, I don't subscribe to this necessarily. Like, you know, like I think it's fine actually, but I just never interrogated it enough to realize that, well, actually, मुझे कोई मसला नहीं है कि मैं रात को गाड़ी अकेली चलाऊं. Like, बिल्कुल. You know, या मैं ये नज़म लिख दूं.
I do think, yeah. I do think कुछ चीजें हमारे पावर में हैं, especially जब आपके पास privilege है, and I think वहाँ introspection की भी जरूरत है. But I think it links back to your question about spaces of joy then, right?
Yeah.
If you break those patterns in your individual life, then you will walk faster towards those spaces of joy.
Absolutely.
We were traveling somewhere with my team who were working on a play अभी कुछ 6-7 महीने पहले, and we were somewhere where there were a lot of women, Asian women also. So they were just party. नाच रही हैं, म्यूजिक लगा के सिर्फ डांस कर रही हैं, right? And my director just kept looking quietly, and then he said कि मैंने आज तक कोई औरत, पाकिस्तानी औरत इतनी खुश तो नहीं देखी जैसे ये नाच रही हैं. You know, the carefree body movement, and they did not care कि कौन देख रहा है कौन नहीं देख रहा. तो मैंने कहा आप कभी हमारी पाकिस्तानी शादियों पे गए हैं? तो उन्होंने कहा वहां पे तो पूरा आपका एक्चुअली डांस जो प्रिपेयर होता है वो इसलिए होता है कि ऐसा नहीं करना, तुम्हारे रिश्ते आएंगे इन शादियों में. नो, वी आर टोल्ड कि शादियों में तो तुम्हारे रिश्ते आने हैं, तो तुम्हें ऐसा डांस नहीं करना और वैसा डांस नहीं करना और ऐसे नहीं बैठना और यूं नहीं करना. सो व्हाट डू यू इवन थिंक? यू नॉट अबाउट डांसिंग, यू आर टॉकिंग अबाउट अ लॉट. So that is the joy, ना? वो वाला जब एक as you said कि I can drive alone at night. I hope we are safe enough to do that. Every woman of my country is safe enough to, you know, even walk alone at night on the roads. So that will be the real joy if she wants to dance or if she wants to sing, or if she wants to smoke, as she said, Sadia. Why?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a real empowerment and independence.
Yeah.
Or to choose who she wants to be with.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nazuk, I think this is something that you've, sort of written about in your photo essays and photographed also, is that sense of freedom when you went away to study and I think that, again, I think we talk about this so much and it doesn't sound like it's a lot, but it is a lot. This sort of ability to just be out, walking.
And lingering, right?
Yeah, lingering, and it's not the same. Absolutely. And it's not the same when people say, oh, phir jaake rotiyan bhi khud le aao tandoor se. It's not the same experience.
It's not the same. Acknowledging my privilege here with this, and another thing that I did recently, I was stuck at home, hadn't been out for quite a long time. And I thought, but I need a space where I can walk, where I can feel a little freer and not be watched. I took up this Airbnb. It's called Suraj Ghar. It's owned by a family, and it's only for women. And actually, I'm here right now in that space. I took up the space Cecilia, just so I sit.
Yeah, I love how you're describing it as taking up space. Well done.
And jisa Beagle, aapne abhi ek cheez mention ki thi about your staff dancing, and there were nights here where I would just sit outside. मैं अपना काम कर रही हूँ, अपना read कर रही हूँ, चाय पी रही हूँ, जो भी कर रही हूँ, without that watchful gaze, and I could hear women on the rooftop अपना वो कुछ celebrate कर रही हैं, जोर जोर से गा रही हैं, जोर जोर से हंस रही हैं, और ये जो पूरी एक space थी, I felt like it just, that was a place of joy for me. That is what, and again, I would acknowledge the fact that this is my privilege, that I could afford to do this, take this Airbnb, and not everyone can. But that's again, going back to your earlier question, how do you reimagine it? That's how I imagine it. But it's, and again, thoda sa limited, but that's how I want it to be. So yes.
And I really love how Nazuk, what you're sharing, and Beagle's yours, is about women in groups. So it's community. So community is giving us strength, and community is giving us joy, and community is giving each other that space, to give each other that space in which to sing or be joyful or dance or just be free, even for a little while.
It has been like this, at least our rural women have been doing that. All the rural women have been doing it, right? Like पानी भरने जा रही हैं इकट्ठे नाचते हुए, या रोटी बना रही हैं इकट्ठे, या कपड़े डाई कर रही हैं, दुपट्टे रंग रही हैं इकट्ठे. So that was a community thing that used to be there.
Or even in the mohalla, even in an urban space where mohallas, where everyone's houses are chatein judi hui hai, and then you can sort of come out into the gully and chat to your neighbor across the street. And maybe it's also like our living patterns are also alienating us in unique ways, which I think, again, this conversation I could just keep having ad nauseum, forever, ad infinitum. But I think that we are at the end of our magnificent hour. And thank you so much, Beagle and Satya and Nazuk, for being with me here today. And thank you for all the wonderful insights that you've had to share about your work and about your ideas and about your own feminist practices. And I've learned so much, and this has just been really, really beautiful, I think, this conversation. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
आज हमारी छतें मिली नहीं, ये मिली रही।
बहुत मजा आया।
बहुत मजा आया। Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ji.
Khudafez. Khudafez.